responsibilities across Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. He joined private equity and started India dedicated fund for core infrastructure. He is also special invitee to the official bilateral CEO forum and a member of the Venture Capital Investment Committee of the US $1.5 billion Fund of Funds for Startups established under the Prime Minister's Startup India Action Plan. See, I had to say this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bagla,
Thank you, ma'am. Really, no, thank you so much. Today is day 38, and before I start speaking about a few experiences on these 38 days, first, thank you everyone for joining us. I see a lot of friends, I see a lot of my old colleagues here, and before I start, I must actually thank a lot of you here. My team has been working with many of you, and the way you've supported this entire effort of the government and everybody else during these 38 days has been tremendous. I've had a number of you coming forward to provide not just funds and not just food, but also helping us in sourcing PPEs and other equipment, which is very critical for all of us during these days. And most importantly, thank you for your patience and understanding. Before I start, I think ma'am gave you a quick introduction, but let me just quickly introduce Invest India to you. It's the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency, promoted by the Government of India, but it's the only platform in the country where all the state governments and the central government together are stakeholders on this one. And it has 4 elements to it. The first is investment promotion and facilitation, where we have separate country teams, sector teams, state teams. They work with any investor coming in globally or locally, helping them with their market strategy, suggesting to them which is the location, getting them all approvals, and also hand-holding them after the business has been set. So it's essentially a one-stop shop. By the way, I must say, the entity doesn't charge anything because it's purely government funded. The second element to us as a vertical is Startup India. You recollect the Prime Minister launched it in January 2016. The entire execution of Startup India and creating the ecosystem is with Invest India. The third vertical of Invest India is what is called the PMSTAG, the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative. It is under Professor Vijay Raghavan. There are a number of things happening within that. One is we are taking innovations on a fast track to commercialization. We also have programs like Waste to Wealth, and also trying to see how we make if we can continue strengthening the R&D system in India and making India the #1 R&D destination globally. And the last one currently is what you call is the PMG, the Project Management Group. Some of you may recollect this used to be in the with the Cabinet Secretary. This is something which the Prime Minister personally monitors every month. It's called Pragati, where all large-scale projects in India above a certain threshold are being monitored on a closed-level basis to see that they get into a fast track of execution. And this is monitored directly by the Prime Minister, so that back office is with Invest India. Now, very quickly on the past 38 days, I would urge all of you, by the way, the team really, one day before the lockdown, so that's, I would say, Saturday, the 27th. Vivek, my colleague, is there, and he'll tell you more. On the 27th evening at 7 o'clock, we launched the Business Immunity Platform. It's on the Invest India website, investindia.gov.in. By the way, I would really urge all of you to go to that website. It's now rated as the #1 website in the world of any investment promotion agency. And it's some interesting information and other interactive. And it's also a place where you can send in your queries and you get immediate responses to it. So on that, we started the Business Immunity Platform. We now have 2 million business people visited in the past 40 days, with over actually 5,500 we've written, but I think tomorrow we'll cross 6,000 queries. And average resolution time of under 4 hours. And it's been working 24/7. The team has actually outdone itself on that. Now, let me just share with you a little. And when you go onto that platform, an interesting element you'll find where there is a daily report which gets posted on it. And if you go through the daily reports of the past 38 days, you will see how all of us together are working through this unprecedented experience of our lifetime. And what will be interesting if you go on it is we give you a pie chart of trying to show you what are the different kind of queries which started coming in. And if you look at the nature of these queries over the past 38 days, you will see how the situation has evolved over the past 38 days. And there's some interesting learnings on that. I'll tell you, for instance, the first time when it happened, and let's face it, it's the most unmatched, unexperienced situation ever in the history of mankind. And by the way, the lockdown which we had in India is the largest lockdown ever, if I may say so. And it's interesting why I bring this up, because if you recollect, on 23rd of last month, the WHO director had said that the future of this pandemic in the world will depend on how India handles it. And I think we all will agree that so far, and it's been very good, it's been fairly well contained. And I think everybody is giving a lot of kudos to the government and the leadership for being able to take the stance and move on very quickly. And, on a daily basis, you'll also see an element in that daily report going stakeholder outreach, where Vivek, my colleague here, Priya, my other colleagues, and our entire team have been reaching out to stakeholders across the globe in calls such as the one which we are having. And one common underlying theme has resonated right across, without an exception, is that the leadership in India provided an unambiguous, unequivocal focus, and that is what has created the strength of where India is today. The second interesting one, and this sort of stemmed out of, a lot of discussion has been happening with investors from the US also, as you would know. And the other interesting element thing has come out is that even though we're going through the most unprecedented experience of our lifetime, remember, there is no playbook on this. And you have no idea what tomorrow is going to be. You can just anticipate. And as we are going into this experience, the anticipation is making it a little better to see what tomorrow's surprises will be like, so we can prepare themselves for it. But we started off with no playbook at all. And I'll give you an instance from the first night when it started. And by the way, we get queries 24/7. So there's a clock on that daily report which will show you how queries are coming in at different times. We got very interesting set of queries. I got a query at 2 a.m. in the morning of a company which supplies breads. It had 12 trucks parked outside Delhi, not being allowed. And he said, if we don't come into the city, nobody will have bread tomorrow morning. Or on the same night, Vivek and his team got a call. That was actually a little earlier, 8 p.m. This is the day when the lockdown was just announced. A company which had explosive material on its trucks, 500 trucks across the country in different locations, carrying inflammable material. And they said that if by tomorrow morning, they're not put in a shade and the sun comes out, it could be a disaster situation. So the team working overnight to make those kind of things happen. So just to put it short, I'll tell you, the first set of queries we got were very heavily biased towards these kind of stopgap fire arrangements, firefighting scenarios. It was a sudden scenario and everybody had to see how to adjust to the process. The other interesting element is, by the time what happens in Delhi and then it goes down to the person on the street who has to monitor the situation. And in fact, if you look at it during the early phase, many people had not realized the importance and the significance of this entire pandemic which we were going through. So initially there were these kind of queries. Then we moved on to queries which were more towards, startups, etc. How do we go through this entire pandemic? How do we go through the lockdown? What are the strategies? What are the business elements we can involve? From then we moved on to what are essential services, because then you realize clarifications for essential services had to be brought in. Then we had a number of queries after that on getting curfew passes. But you know what's interesting? Each of these new sets of challenges which kept coming, if you look at that, within 24, 48, 72 hours, you started seeing resolutions happening on them on a macro level and even on the ground level. There will still be situations. We'll never be in a perfect situation, frankly. But the point remains that as much as it could be done, and that shows the responsiveness of the system. There were, within the system, I can tell you, there was complete firefighting happening on an urgent basis. There were task forces created By the way, there are 11 task forces created by the government on various aspects of medical supplies, etc. And our team is supporting virtually all of them, but are working very actively with 5 of them, including business reconstruction. So I'll quickly bring down myself to another 2 minutes, because then we'll have 10 minutes left to have some Q&A. But I'll tell you what we've experienced. What was happening just before COVID had happened is that we had started seeing a large influx and interest of investments coming in from overseas. And if I look at my top 10 countries, and Vivek and all could speak more on that later, would be USA. We had a lot of interest coming in from China, Taiwan, Japan, Germany, South Korea, UK, France, and then we had a lot from the Middle East, etc., coming in. And very interestingly, there were a large number of companies which had started coming out from the eastern part of the globe. So I'll tell you, when we started this entity 5 years ago, if I drew a pie chart, I would have said about 40 to 45% investments were coming from the US. Today, if I draw that pie chart, it'll come down to a little less than a third. In absolute amount, it is probably over doubled. But in relative terms, it is coming down because we are having a large number of other countries coming in very fast. And I'm seeing that interest coming in a far more active way now. In fact, even during these past 38 days, we've been having a lot of queries which the team has been working on. On the sectors, electronic systems design, auto, capital goods, chemicals, textiles, metals and mining. Let me turn the page around. Renewable energy, pharma and biotech, oil and gas, leather. By the way, interest has come in across 47 sectors. These are just some of the top 10 which I thought I'll mention with you. So as we see coming out of this scenario, and you've seen that the entire effort of the government is now to see how much and how fast we can open it all. And if you go through the details of what is going to happen from tomorrow, you'll see that a lot of new services have been opened up, a lot of new stuff has been released, a little still tighter on the red side, on the red areas, only just to see that we can contain it. And as we know, life is more important. I was just seeing one of the webinars of Jack Ma, and he said this year is only about saving your life. And if you've saved your life, you made a profit. So I'm not going by as negative a thought as that one, but I must say that one of the basic focus for us is to how fast we can emerge out of it. And we're having a lot of interest from across the globe today, especially because everybody is that element of de-risking their supply chains, de-risking their investments, moving their eggs from a single basket to multiple others. That is now taking a much faster and a proactive route in all boardrooms across the globe. And based out of that, we are seeing a lot of interest in what is happening within the government very actively. And I must say so, especially in the past, I would say 18 days. The team has been working non-stop, trying to see what are the policy measures which can be brought in within the system, what are the ease of doing mechanisms where we can make the investor journey a little friendlier, more easier, more lucrative, and moving businesses not just from viability, but also profitability. So with that, I'll rest myself, and I'm here more to hear from you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Let me look at your questions which have come in. Basically, some of our members have already asked us before we started this to ask you, what is the special support for MSME sector?
So MSME is now going to be the primary focus area.
Yes.
You see, I mean, half of my workforce is there, half of my GDP, close to that, is coming out from there. The other, and you are seeing what you require in the MSME side. By the way, I must say, we had a challenge both on the demand and the supply side together. So, that is where there's a double whammy. And that is where the focus on, especially for the MSME, is one, how to get liquidity back into the system. For them, working capital is absolutely critical.
Yes.
And the government is working on various measures on how to get that liquidity going in. And I'm sure when during the course of the next few days, you will hear more details on it, you'll be quite happy with that one. The second is to try and see how we can get them greater demand. So how is it that government purchasing can be a little more from them? How is it that we can open up global markets for them? The PM has always been saying that pick up a product in every district and then map it globally and help it to get exported. I think that's a great idea. The other element is how do we develop clusters, and which is going to happen in a big manner. We have over 3,000 clusters in India. And this is where for the MSMEs, if you can provide them a good plug and play and infrastructure around it in a cluster, it will bring down their cost of operation, it will bring down their headache, it will make them more effective, and it will make them more competitive. So you're bringing all these elements together. There's a big focus and thrust on MSME and the small guy especially and the medium one. So you will hear about that pretty soon. It is truly a central focus area for the government.
I'm going back to what you said, that a lot of inquiries are coming in nearly 47 sectors. And how do we come to know about this? How do we have an idea?
I'll tell you.
Now,
as far as a business inquiry is concerned, you would appreciate it's confidential. It's up to that company, whichever one reaches out to us, it's for them to announce to the public and not for us. So a lot of this information is confidential of that nature. However, the aggregate numbers and the sectoral approaches and the country approaches on aggregates, you'll tend to find a lot on the website because it's a continuous work in progress on a daily basis. It keeps getting updated. And you'll find a lot of that information, in fact, virtually everything, except the specific names, all sitting out there.
Someone has asked me, Kumar Ravi, that there's a lot of expectation that when companies are leaving China to other places, I mean, India is really not there in a big way. We are not able to attract them enough. So how do we manage this?
So frankly, if you ask me this question, I'll say it's never enough. There's always more I would like to do. Would I want 100% of those companies to come to me? Of course, the answer is yes, and that's a utopian one. The fact is they will not all come to me. There are other places where it would meet their objectives far more. Also, we are looking for companies. For example, I told you these sectors where we have specific strengths. We are looking at companies which create employment for us. We are actually looking for companies where there's going to be a huge value addition coming into India. So it's not just you do a screwdriver technology and moving from here. I don't know if you know, but in the past 48 months, India is now the number one R&D destination in the world. For multinationals opening their R&D offices outside of the head office, India is number one. So when I put all these elements in together, I think in the shrinking market pie, global FDI, to put it in perspective, last year global FDI was about 1.4 trillion. We were in the top 10 countries and we were very high up there, especially on greenfield FDI. I see my percentage, even though that 1.4 trillion might come down to 700 billion, I see my percentage in that pie going up much more. And that is how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at areas where I'm seeking that investment more proactively and going and reaching out to them, and the team is doing that very effectively. So a lot has been done, a lot more needs to be done, and a lot more is what we are going to be doing.
Somebody is asking that they want to do something in chemicals with American companies in high-tech area, and how will they know what kind of help they can get from Invest India? And they want to also shift in for offshore production facility in India. In case that is happening, then the machinery to be installed and reinstalled, and all that treatment for that is anyway they can get some help from Invest India. And I can keep on asking that the questions are like coming by a second.
No, so let me just go for this one.
Yeah.
So basically the team handholds you through the entire investment cycle, from showing you the opportunity to helping you get a location within the number of states we have in India, within that state, getting you that land, working on the allocations, helping you with the approvals, and helping you actually get that business executed and started in a short period of time. So the team works through that entire effort life cycle. On partnerships, we are working to see how we can start doing that in a more transparent manner. And hopefully that as soon as we open up, this entire pandemic opens up, we will come up with a transparent system where we will create some kind of, some kind of a website or whatever where partnerships can happen depending on what you are offering and what somebody else is looking for. And that matchmaking is going to happen in that manner. But as of now, if you do have a thought, please leave it with us on the team. What is it which you're looking for? Be as specific as you can. You can come onto that website, send us a query, and it's not going into a black hole. There is a voice and a person and a live person sitting at the other end working with you on that one.
Mr. Bagla, if now that they're hearing you, if they have certain inquiries, as you said, the sectoral information you already have, it's something you can't share. But if, say, somebody is now asking for leather industry, somebody is asking about food industry, many questions have come on different industries and MSMEs. I mean, I can't go into all these questions, but basically that's what they're saying. And if they write to you directly, saying we want to do business with US, we are interested in doing business with US. So will you be able to open some doors for us at that time, handhold us, and tell, okay, Arizona has this, or somebody is interested, I mean, so that they can have, that matchmaking there? Would you be doing that?
So we are not doing outbound investment matchmaking at all yet. And do we have plans? Yes, at some time in the near future, where we'll be working on that. But as of now, if you're looking for us to matchmake you for your investments going overseas, we're not really doing that. On the trading side, you have the DGFT, the Director General of Foreign Trade, and they have a website where it gives you a very fairly good idea of what is happening, where the countries are sourcing what products on a real-time basis, and you can start looking at that.
Okay.
So we are more on the investment side, more on the inbound side as we speak about it. I also saw a query here that you wanted Mr. Bagla's contact details. Listen, please, more than happy. The website is there, as I mentioned to you. You can send it. It comes directly into me and to the entire team, and it's a flat organization. So please send it on that, and it'll reach all of us, and you'll get a response and a team working with you on that one. I also saw Girish Bhagat wanting to ask some questions, ma'am. It's come 2-3 times. It's disappeared now.
Yeah, I also lost it right now.
Okay.
Somebody is asking about, he's doing business in China for the last 12 years. And he has his own production facility and in improving lighting sector. What is the scope now he has in this? If he wants to do something in oil, gas, and agriculture lighting, etc.
Why don't you move that production facility to India? We are here to work with you to do it.
He will, I'm sure, provided you can handhold him.
And I must tell you about business pivoting. I think that is now going to be the biggest thing going forward post-COVID, is businesses which are pivoting themselves and getting onto new product lines. I must give you an example, which is one of my most favorite ones which I've seen. A company which used to create medical syringes, those plastic syringes, injection syringes, is now a big supplier to one of the world's largest toy makers, and is now after that looking to see how it can create ventilators. It's amazing. Can you see that pivoting happening in a period of 48 months?
Yes.
And these are businesses which are going to pivot themselves, which are going to be nimble to take it on quick. In fact, when you go to my daily website, you will see a large part of my team is currently working with startups and innovations. We've got a towel maker who's making masks for us. We're getting small auto companies helping us do ventilators, and the team is hand-holding them right through for everything, for getting them technology, for getting them a larger guy to get the manufacturing line going, to getting them raw materials, to seeing that a special aircraft is coming, how we can load their stuff on that to bring in the raw materials or the spare parts, and then to see how we can get them certified, and then to try to take them into the government system after certification of getting their orders. So the team, it is an amazing experience. So when you go on that, you will see a medical supply section. There's a separate team just doing that. It's a fascinating 38 days we've gone through. And what comes out of it is that innovation, the nimbleness, and the ability of the Indian business to work towards a new opportunity and to do it fast and quick is amazing. And that is what I think will create, as I see, the starting of New India, which starts just after post-COVID.
Now, this Girish Bhagat had asked you that foreign companies in India that are exporting their products, can we give them same benefits as SEZ, even if they are not in SEZ?
Girish, I think there would be a lot of discussions happening on that one. And you know, you and I have discussed this several times. So let's wait and see. But I'm sure that exports out of India are going to get a lot of prominence. Exports out of India are going to get a lot of push and impetus. And you'll be quite happy to see how things progress on that one.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you.
I think have I run out of my time now, it seems.
No, there's nothing.
You've taken a lot of it for no.
You can continue.
No, we've got Vikram here who's far more interesting. So please understand, I'd rather have Vikram speak to everyone now that we have them instead of me. And guys, please reach out to us anytime you want. Please bring in your investments. Let's work together. There's a lot to be done. And we look forward, and please come on to our website. And by the way, if I may just plug in a little one, Invest India in a short period of 4 years has been rated by the UN as the world's #1 investment promotion agency. So that's just to let you know that a startup of the government of India, it's also that within a government bracket, you can actually get points of excellence.
Wow. Congratulations, Mr. Bagla. It's so nice to hear that. And I'm happy time. We're going to get back to you to answer some questions another time.
Rajyalakshmi,
I think Mahindra Chauhan is asking your question. Can you just take that, please?
Sure.
We lost low bandwidth, they're saying. Low bandwidth. Can you hear him?
Unfortunately not.
Even I couldn't hear. Yeah, please say.
Hi.
Yeah. Can you quickly ask a question?
Hi, Deepak, can you hear me?
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah. My congratulations on the fantastic work that you're doing. But a quick question, now that there is an increasing unpopularity of China around the world, I and everyone sees a distinct opportunity for India. But the business will not automatically flow. So what are the 2-3 important policy interventions that you think Government of India should immediately speaking? What are you hearing from the industry?
So what we are saying is, and what we are trying to do actually, is the first one is to try and see how we make that investor journey as painless as possible and decrease all the blocks coming on the way. You know, like a single window which has been created with Invest India. Similarly, how do we replicate the same experience at the state level? Because that's where a large part of the experience happens. And you'll be happy to know that during the past of the 48 months, we now have 21 states in India which have specific investment promotion agencies where Invest India has been working with them, training them, etc. And they're coming up the curve very fast. So that's the first element on how do we make that journey and that experience something worthwhile and easy for each one of them. The second is, how is it that we can provide more and more plug-and-play facilities? That is very quick. You want that capital to be starting to work in a very short period of time. I'll give you an instance, and I'm taking into Vikram's time, but I'll take 2 minutes on that one. You know, world's largest wind power company is Vestas. It's out of Belgium. And when they came to India, we asked them that was the best experience they had. Well, not the best, but the shortest period they had from the day their board gave them approval in Belgium to the day their factory had the commercial production coming out. And they said it was in China in 18 months. When they come to India, they'd been advised by their consultants and lawyers in India that it takes anywhere between 48 to 72 months. You'll be happy to know that Vestas in India did it in 14 months, 28 days. It's the fastest experience they ever had of getting from the day they got approvals in Belgium to the day the first blade came out of their factory in India. And based on that, they're moving a large part of their investments, which are going to an ASEAN country, into India. So a lot of these experiences, a lot of these stories of new India are out there. One of the mistakes we've not done enough is to go ahead and tell these stories. And this is the transition period which is happening, and that is what we want to keep creating more and more of these stories this is what will bring investment to us. Thank you.
Can I just say one more question that somebody has put for you? I think you're in a rush to leave.
Can we take Vikram's approval on that one? Please. He's my senior from college.
Okay. Somebody is asking, Vaibhav, that there are some companies coming to India and they don't know where to go. And in case their companies are location agnostic, how do you advise them on the location? Also, is there a concentrated plan by government to invest India to work with private industrial parks as well, apart from the government parks?
Oh, absolutely. We're working very closely with a number of private industrial parks. By the way, companies, what we typically do is take from them what are their asks in a location, companies, and then we try and match them to the locations where they are. We take them directly to the state governments. The other element which is happening, if these are larger investments, what we do is we bring down their asks, we create a matrix, we bring it down to 4 or 5 states, and then those state governments send in senior officials into Delhi to pitch to these companies, give them 2 or 3 hours each, after which they decide on 1 or 2, and then we take them to the state. By the way, I must also say that there's a huge exercise which is going on, which you will hear of in the next few days. We are trying to put all land banks available, and we are in touch with all the state governments on the website. And ideally, at some point of time, an investor sitting in anywhere in the world will be able to see that plot of land directly through this website and decide where they want to go.
Like a cluster spaces?
Cluster spaces, land which is already available in the government. You know, by the way, I must say one thing. So we've done, we currently hand-holding $177 billion worth of investment coming into India. 26 billion of that has already come in. You know, it comes in stages. I must say that of these 2,000 odd queries which we managed, and these specific 177 billion, which has about 600 odd companies, not even a single company has had a problem, or I would say is not doing business in India because of paucity of land. There could something be that there could be a little difference. I remember, for example, a company coming and saying wanting 2.5 acres in Connaught Place in Delhi itself, which we explained to them was not available. So we got them a little outside of Connaught Place. And you would have understood it's Madame Tussauds, for example. But land is available, and this entire thing about the paucity is, I've not yet experienced it for any of the companies we've handled so far. Thank you again. Thank you, ma'am.
One last question. Sorry.
Sure.
Raw materials for pharma companies in India come from China, Mr. Ravi is asking. Now, what do we do?
So that's a big one. Import substitution is very critical, and self-reliance all the more. As I said, I started my discussion by saying risk diversification is now going to be a critical element, even personally, for governments, for business, for corporates, everywhere across the globe. And as a part of that, I think we've shown how strong we are on generics and many of the other things. And I think this is another thing which we will see a focus coming into it, and our self-reliance growing more on that one.
Can I just say my parting words, that I think everybody is looking at, of course, you're giving a lot of help from every direction, but the best help we need is for money from the financial sector and the banks. Since you're talking to the government on all these things, by generally saying in a moratorium, that's all fine. But this person who comes from MSME is really come to ground level. Requires a lot more. Somebody announced on the TV, economic secretary, and he said, a lot of love has to be given. Love is not enough. Funding is required.
Sure.
They have to be treated beautifully by all the financial sector. You know, otherwise people are scared. People are scared to go to courts. People are scared to go to banks. You have to now give them that true helping hand. These are the people who need. And I think that is a recommendation. Please do, when you sit on all these meetings from your side. I think most of the questions are also saying that is the inner thought. And I'm also a little concerned about the next 2 months for them to get back into some business. So on those last few requests, then I can close this particular session. And Deepak, thank you so much for having accepted. but I think we'll get back on another issue, how to do with the Indo-US opportunities at the time. Thank you very much,
ma'am. And I must thank you to everyone for being there. And I must tell you, MSMEs, frankly, closest to our heart. And every meeting I've sat in, I think they've done a lot of stakeholder consultation, coming bottom up, top down, every which way. Everyone is quite working towards the same objective. Thank you again. Bye-bye. And we hope to see you soon on our website and with me at any time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Participants, please continue to stay on. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Vikram Mehta. He's coming. Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Vikram.
Hello, Rajyalakshmi. How are you?
Welcome to this webinar. And we had just had Deepak Bagla session in the morning a while back with all the questions. So if it's okay with you, you will have to continue a little longer when the questions will come for you, because we've gone into a little extra time into your chat. And for our participants, I want to talk about Mr. Vikram Singh Mehta. He is currently serves as the Executive Chairman of Brookings India in New Delhi and a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Mehta started his career with the Indian Administrative Service in 1978, and thereafter he joined Phillips Petroleum in London as a senior economist. He was also chairman of the Shell Group of Companies in India in 1994. Mr. Mehta was a recipient of Asia House's Businessman of the Year Award for 2010. He also received Asia Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability Award for Best Independent Director for 2016. He is a member of the Board of Overseas the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, and the Board of Governors of the Pandit Deen Dayal University of Petroleum. He was formerly chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Duke of Edinburgh Award for India and a member of the Board of Governors of Toon School. He is also an independent director on the boards of L&T, Mahindra & Mahindra, Colgate Palmolive. That's about few that I can mention. And now that we have discussed about part of the Invest India side, now Vikram, we are looking forward because you have an overall picture having dealt with so many countries and also being involved in every space that is there, for us to know about. We are looking forward for your inputs to our members. They're eagerly looking forward to hearing from you. They're across in many states all over the country, and we have 10 offices, and from there also in other places they've all connected and to hear you. And the stage is yours, and the questions will come back to you after that.
Thank you very much, Rajyalakshmi. Thank you for inviting me to address your members. I listened into Deepak's comments for about 5-7 minutes, and I know that there were a lot more questions that were directed to him. You probably should have given him more time because he clearly has answers to all of the basic issues that your members are concerned about. My own approach for today's conversation is somewhat less specific. I am not going to be able to respond to the specifics of how an individual businessman can do business better in India or even in America. But I will try and address, let's say, 3 issues. One is I give you a sense of the broad geopolitics of the post-COVID world, and especially with the focus on the US-China relations, oil, and the US presidential elections, as they might impact the opportunities that companies in India might be able to realize in a new post-COVID world in America. I will endeavor to also identify specifics of these opportunities. But let me start by just reminding everyone as to where we are. And I know Deepak probably addressed that too, but we, of course, in India are in the midst of a massive recession, and which has been caused in part by the fact that we were already a weakening economy as we entered the COVID world, but then, of course, totally by the demand destruction caused by COVID and the supply shock or the supply disruption to the supply chain as a result of the lockdown. This recession or this economic impact has not been offset by the terms of trade benefits that we have received from the crash in oil prices. So we are today, in the midst of a severe downturn that has tangible impact in terms of unemployment. The numbers that I'm seeing are historic: 26-27% unemployment. 120 million people are out of a job. The informal economy has been disproportionately impacted. The banks are, of course, in deep trouble. So, in effect, we are in the midst of a crisis. Now, against that backdrop, there are some clear unknowns. The first unknown is what will be the shape of the economic recovery. Will it be a V-shaped recovery? That's what the optimists hope, that the downturn will now be followed by a sharp upturn. Will it be an elongated U-shaped recovery? We will have the downturn, and then there will be a period of a very slow growth, and then we will see an upturn. Or will it be a W-shaped recovery, which is what some of the epidemiologists might predict, in that we will see an upturn, but a second wave of infection might hit us, and that will result in another downturn. And the real durable, enduring upturn will only come about when we have found a therapeutic answer to the crisis. No one is actually talking about an I-shaped disaster scenario, thankfully, which is that we will continue to fall because of one crisis following another crisis. But this economic recovery is something that we cannot predict. This is an uncertainty. This is a concern for anyone who's doing business. In the longer term, the uncertainty is what will the post-COVID world look like? What will be the contours of the new normal that we will have to adapt to once the crisis is over? Will this new normal lead to a decoupling from the global economy? How will our behaviors shift? Will our companies really focus on more work to home work patterns? What will be will digitization accelerate? Will this lead to a deepening of inequalities in our country? I mean, 400 million people are still not connected to broadband, and that digitization might well actually deepen the divide. There is also some concern that maybe this might lead to a return to some form of the permit Raj. These are questions that people are asking, academics are commenting on, and I know businessmen also talk about, perhaps not in public. But these are some of the big issues that, the big uncertainties that we will have to wrestle with in the longer term. The fact is that today the government of India has done, as Deepak said, a very good job in trying to manage the pandemic. They're, I think, very sensibly now tackling the issue of exiting from the lockdown, but they still have to address the issue of recovery, and they also now have to also, of course, look at the post-COVID world. For industry, for all of you, against this sort of uncertainty, there's some basic messages that everyone will pass on to you, and I don't need to remind you of that. You're all the business, but I'm not. But clearly, one message is that we will have to manage our cash flows. That's got to be the main focus. We will have to manage our people. That's got to be another very important priority. But beyond these two obvious priorities, every business should have a plan now on what will we do in the event that the recovery actually does not sustain, that the recovery is followed by another downturn. Do we have a post-COVID and yet do we have a playbook on how we will respond in the event that the recovery is followed by another downturn? I certainly recommend that every businessman, small, medium, or large, actually prepare a very detailed plan of action on how they will respond, how every member of their company, and how they will respond to a crisis. And here, this response must include their supply chain, their vendors, their customers. So it must be a total plan that they should prepare now. So that's, I think, the background, I'd say, for functioning in a COVID and post-COVID world. Now, if I move on to actually ask the question, so what is the geopolitics? What's going to be the geopolitical implications of COVID? There are many answers to that question, and one could take a sweep of the world and look at each part of the world separately. But let me just focus on first the oil market, because that's of relevance to all of us. Second, on China, and then third on the US. And these are the three, I think, countries or regions that will be of direct interest to all of you. So as far as the oil market is concerned, very briefly, let me remind you that the oil market all through 2019 was sort of kept somewhat stable because of a production cutback agreed between the OPEC countries and Russia. And this production cutback offset the somewhat bearish fundamentals of demand, and also to an extent offset the rise in oil production out of the US. The price of oil averaged around $64 a barrel all through 2019. 2020 was hit by COVID, and it was also then hit by a remarkably, you might say, foolish kind of face-off between Saudi Arabia and Russia in Vienna in the middle of March. So COVID had already destroyed a large part of the oil market in terms of demand, but this was compounded by the failure of Saudi Arabia and Russia to agree to roll over the supply constraints that they had agreed in the previous 2 years. In fact, on the contrary, Saudi Arabia decided that they were going to ramp up production from their current levels of about 10 million barrels a day to 12.5 million barrels a day. And Russia decided that they would also increase production. The reasoning behind Saudi Arabia was to maintain their market share the logic for Russia was that they wanted to push the oil industry, the shale oil industry in the U.S. Into the walls. And the consequence of this face-off was that the price of oil collapsed. It went from around $55, $56 in March to $30 by the end of March. And as you all probably saw last week or 2 weeks, the futures market in the US actually fell into negative territory. Now, the reason why the futures market I won't go into technicalities about that, but the reason why the futures market fell into negative territory was because the oversupply of oil into the market in general had led to a constraint on storage capacity. So there was simply no capacity for oil companies to store product, and this was storage capacity on land, that is tanks, as well as offshore, that is tankers, ships. Now this reflected the reality of an oil market that was oversupplied and where demand had been destroyed almost to the extent of the entire production of OPEC, which is about 30 million barrels a day. Now, this is the basics, this is the sort of the outline of the oil market, but the geopolitical ramifications of that on India are pretty dramatic. One is that, as you probably know, we import 55% of all our crude oil from the Middle East. The Middle Eastern countries are going to face a massive social, economic, and possibly political dislocation as a result of the fall in oil prices. Saudi Arabia needs an average of $80 a barrel to balance its budget. The most robust OPEC member today is Qatar, and it needs $40 a barrel to balance its budget. The current price of crude oil today, as we speak, is around $24, $25. Of Brent, that is the North Sea crude oil, is about $24. So you can just imagine that you have these Middle Eastern countries that are going to find it very difficult to meet the social expectations of their citizens. Now, many of these countries have a very large sovereign reserve, and they will draw down on those sovereign reserves to balance their books and also to perhaps meet these expectations of their citizens. But there is no question that they're going to have to also cut back on expenditure. They might have to raise taxes, and we should be prepared as in India to see a possible disruption in the supply lines between the Middle Eastern crude oil producers, and India. So that's one ramification that we should be building into our planning as far as the oil market is concerned. The possible disruption of supplies from our main crude oil production centers into India. The second geopolitical ramification and financial ramification is that we have around 8 million Indians in the Gulf countries alone, and they remit approximately $40 to $45 billion every year. Now that is going to come down by a very large percentage. I can't predict what will be that cutback, but it will be a very significant cutback because many of these Indians are going to lose their jobs as the economy in these Gulf countries slows down. So that's the other geopolitical or financial consequence. We have to, as a country, now, this is not necessarily relevant to your interest, but I just wanted to put on the table here that we must, as a country, of course, now recognize that even in the post-COVID world, we will be dependent on imports. And we will therefore have to turn to either these countries, which are political and socially somewhat now unstable, or we'll have to find alternative sources for our oil and gas requirements. My own recommendation to the government in writing has been that we must now very aggressively fill our strategic petroleum reserves. We must actually enlarge our strategic petroleum reserves, and we must also leverage the benefits of an of this low oil price by locking in future supplies right now. But this is, broadly speaking, you might say, the geopolitical ramifications of COVID as they pertain to the oil industry and as that impacts India. I could say a lot more, but I won't. Then, if I may move on and just talk about China for a moment. I know that a lot of you have your businesses in China. Perhaps many of you are dependent on inputs from China, imported components, and in any event, the role of China in India is of interest to everyone. China has been on an economic slowdown for now a couple of years, and COVID has certainly also brought the Chinese economy to a standstill. But that is not the main issue for us. The main issue for us is threefold. One is that China and the US have been on a collision course for some time now. And COVID has both intensified some of the features of the antagonism between China and India, and it has also introduced new issues of conflict. Over the last 2 or 3 years at least, the China and US have been battling over issues related to trade, been battling over issues related to industrial espionage. The Americans have been particularly concerned about the activities of the Confucius Institute in China. Of course, as you all know, China is also, there's concern that China might establish a technology beachhead in American systems and American companies through their technologies like Huawei, the 5G technology. There's concern about cybersecurity, cyberspace. So these are some of the issues that have been a matter of discussion and debate and conflict between US and China for some time. But now, of course, with this COVID, there are new items that have now been put onto the table. And the big issue today is whether or not China is going to be held responsible in the eyes of the Americans for the COVID crisis. And there's a blame game now actually surfacing in America, whereby politicians and others are deciding whether or not China actually conspired to create COVID, or whether China should be sued for COVID. And this issue has become centerpiece. It may well become, I think it will become, the pivotal issue around which the American elections are going to be held. Trump was riding quite comfortably until his massive miscalculation on COVID. His approval ratings were high because of the economy. The economy was doing well in America. The stock market was at an all-time high. And then, of course, he made those extraordinary blunders with regard to COVID. And the economy, of course, has now also gone into a dive. Today, the presidential election in America is no longer going to be centered around the economy. Trump cannot afford to make the economy the centerpiece of his election campaign. And he's finding China as a convenient pivot around which to actually now plan his election campaign. And he's using that China as the basis for attacking Joe Biden, who today is the front runner for the Democratic nomination. So there is now the China factor is become a big issue. As far as we are concerned in India, there are two issues that we have to be thinking about. One is the supply chain. How will U.S. companies, how will any company, any international companies respond to the fact of the disruption in the supply chain? There are today companies like Apple and Foxconn and others, they were strongly, and most companies had a very deep investment in China. Their entire supply chain was strongly integrated into the Chinese economy, and they are now having to review the consequences of the US-China technology and trade Cold War. Will these companies go back to India, go back to their home countries, or will they look to creating other production centers outside their parent country? This is a decision that many companies have not taken, but from what we can see and what I can see, the likelihood is that companies are going to be looking to localize production centers across many different production centers outside their own home country. And this is, of course, to leverage the cost of labor and also the still reality of a global supply chain. Will India benefit from that? And Deepak was very clear that India has made huge strides in attracting investments from China into India, and I'm very glad to hear that. But clearly, we still have to do a lot, and I'm sure he will agree with me that whilst there's been tremendous progress, we still have to actually take decisions on what we call the second generation reforms relating to the land market, labor market, capital market. And unless we are able to liberalize those markets, we might find that our investment value proposition is not as strong as the value proposition offered by Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries that are also bidding for the same investment dollar that might flow out of China. So that's the first big question that we have to address as far as China is concerned. The second is China's foreign policy is muscular foreign policy. As I said earlier, there is now a polarization between US and China, and this polarization is leading to a more muscular Chinese foreign policy, especially with regard to countries in Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. Our neighbor, Pakistan, is in free fall. Its economy it appears to me difficult to repair. The only country that might be able to bail it out is China. So will China actually seek to establish a stronger foothold in Pakistan to our geopolitical detriment by taking advantage of Pakistan's weakness? So that's another big question that I think we will have to address. So let me just now go to my final point, and I can throw it open to questions. The future. What, if any, opportunities exist for all of us in a post-COVID world? Clearly, a post-COVID world, at least in the medium term, and by that I mean next 2-3 years, I can't project beyond that. I'd say next 3-4 years, actually, is going to be a world that is less globalized. It's going to be a world that is less prosperous. A lot of the expenditure, a lot of the investments that companies had planned are going to be pushed back, are going to be withheld or pushed back. Recovery is going to be slow. It's going to be tentative. And it will really pick up only after the world has discovered a therapeutic response to the pandemic crisis. That said, we cannot assume that the globalized, integrated economy is going to just disappear. I do not believe that's the case. I believe that we will not go back to the world of nationalisms or the world of fortress economies. We will still be an integrated economy, but it will be, as I said, less globalized. Companies will be reluctant to put all their eggs in one supply chain basket. They will diversify, as I said, but there will be opportunities for all companies, big or small, to leverage the fact or the reality of continuing global integration. There is going to be clearly we're not going to go back to a pre-COVID world. That is out of the question. There's going to be a dramatic behavioral shift, whether it's in the form of social distancing, whether it's because of work to home, whether it's the digital transformation. Every country, every region, every society, even within society, community is going to respond differently to the consequences of the COVID crisis. What we face today, in my personal view, is not just an epidemic of infectious disease. We also are facing a crisis of fear, the crisis of the epidemic of fear that has been brought about by perhaps an epidemic of misinformation. And I think the combination of misinformation and fear is going to define the way we respond, is going to define our behaviors for years to come. So there's going to be a behavioral shift. In this world, I think a lot of our companies, big, small, and others, will have opportunities, but that opportunity will depend on two rather, you might say, cliched words, but it's something that is going to acquire greater resonance in the coming months and coming years. One is trust, and the other is value. Companies that are trusted, brands that are trusted, products that are trusted are going to find it that much easier to break into this new world. And second, companies that can clearly define the value that they provide to the customer are also going to be better placed and more competitive than those that are carrying out business as usual. Trust and value are going to be absolutely paramount for companies to succeed in a post-COVID world. Within that category, I think everyone will find that there may be new opportunities in areas like health and outsourcing. That's a generic business that's going to grow, I think. But there will be also opportunities for small businesses that are focused on niche products. For example, as an obvious example, the market in India for hand sanitizers was until 2 months ago all of 150 crores. It is today almost 1,000 crores. So small and medium-sized businesses are going to have to actually define their business opportunity in a more granular way, and they will have to look for leveraging their assets, which are brand and value. So I'm going to just stop here, but I want to go back to the first point I made, or one of the early points I made, is that every business that is looking to continue or to grow in the post-COVID world must today have a plan of action on how they will respond to a post-COVID crisis. Rajyalakshmi, all yours.
There's so many questions for you, and you're such a big think tank. It's like so many areas you have, that comfort to talk about, especially oil prices and the U.S. economy and the election, and you touched on all these things. And also you said you would recommend that we should save our petroleum reserves, and in the low oil prices, we should actually lock in that kind of futuristic supplies. I hope, I'm sure these are the recommendations of government from think tank. I hope they look at it so that we are at least in a comfortable situation as times go. Is this what you said, and am I repeating it correctly?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Now some questions have come in. Girish Bhagat, huge global debt leads to a currency collapse. What do you say on that?
Yeah, that's a very broad question. Let's just start by looking at first India's debt, then maybe moving on to the debt of other countries. Then ask the question whether we in India should throw the kitchen sink at the crisis that we're facing, just like the Americans have done. So what am I saying? Today, India's debt to GDP ratio is around 68%. That is lower than many other countries in the West. The average debt to GDP in Europe is over 90%, and in America it is even higher. The Indians, there is a big debate in India right now as to whether we should actually deepen our fiscal deficit to accelerate the recovery. The one group of economists will argue that on the back of the debt that we have considered the fact that we have a low debt to GDP ratio. We have we have sufficient space to really do much more than what we are doing right now. Currently, we are spending about 1% of our GDP on our recovery, and the economists are saying we should do much more. There are another group of economists which are saying that if we actually go well beyond the fiscal sort of parameters that define prudential economics, we will find that our currency there will be an outflow of capital and our currency will collapse. I personally believe, that is my personal view, that our currency has already discounted the fiscal deficit, and that we should actually spend a lot more money in hastening the recovery and bringing about, as I said, a V-shaped recovery rather than and trying to ensure that we don't fall into a W or a U-shaped kind of a U-shaped recovery. And I believe that's where we should go. And I don't think that as I said, the rupee I think has already been the rupee price has already discounted a high fiscal deficit. As far as the other countries are concerned, the U.S. dollar, of course, is the reserve currency. And today, the U.S. economy, the U.S. Fed, is doing which is totally unprecedented. If you were to think about it, in 2008, 2009, the time of the global recession, the U.S. added around 0.3% or so of their GDP to stimulate recovery. Today, they have added almost 3% of their GDP. $3.3 trillion of money has been pumped into the economy, and the dollar hasn't sunk. Okay, let's be clear. Dollar is a reserve currency. So I think at this time we should really be looking at expenditure to tide us over to clear this crisis, and we must make sure that this expenditure is, of course, directed to productive uses. And I'm not sure. I don't think the currency is as much at risk as it would be under normal economic conditions.
Shay Vinod asks you, what will create better mentality for banks in India and overseas to lend more and faster?
Yes, I think that the banking system in India is the heart of our economic recovery. And unfortunately, the arteries of the banking system or the financial system, I'd say, have not been cleaned up yet. One of the big problems that we are facing today is that there's a lot of liquidity, but that liquidity is not actually reaching it's not reaching industry. Those companies that have the balance sheet and the collateral to secure credit don't really want the money right now because there's no demand for their product or they have underutilized capacity. And those companies that need money don't have the collateral to persuade banks to release the credit. So we have to absolutely clear these problems of the banking system urgently. Otherwise, there's going to be the crisis of demand is going to be compounded by a crisis of liquidity, which could then lead to a crisis of solvency. Today, we are facing a crisis largely of liquidity. Companies are not able to pay their vendors, they're not able to pay salaries, but it isn't as if the fundamentals of the businesses have been totally eroded. But if this situation continues, if the banking system does not actually provide cash, provide liquidity, then a lot of these companies are going to become insolvent. It will not be possible for those companies to survive, to recover, even as we enter the post-COVID world. So it is imperative that this issue of finance be addressed urgently and in a very aggressive way.
Akshay Vinod has asked you another question. Post-COVID, do you think global countries will go digital currencies by this way to eliminate black money?
The digital transformation is now a trend that will get accelerated as a result of the COVID crisis. As I mentioned digitization was always a fact. It was progressing, but COVID has accelerated that progression. So we will see more and more businesses, more and more countries actually moving aggressively towards the digital world, and that will manifest itself in the way we work, in the manner in which supply chains are redesigned, in also the manufacturing processes. The manufacturing companies, for example, will have to focus on reducing fixed costs, on providing a lean and digital work environment because margins are going to be under pressure. So digitization is now is going to be accelerated. It's a trend that is not going to stop. This is, of course, going to lead to a deepening divide between countries and companies and societies because there will be some countries and some companies and some societies that will not be able to get on to the digital train. They may not have the resources, they may not have the technical capability, they may get left behind. And if that happens, the digital divide, as we've talked about in the past, so often in the past, in conversation, is going to get deeper and wider. And that's going to lead to a social issue. So that's one of the big concerns that I have about a post-COVID world. So that was one part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
About the black money, elimination of black money because of that.
Well, yeah, black money. I think. I'm not an expert on how on that issue, but I do know that over the last not because of digitization, not because of COVID, but because of digitization, because of a global world, there are very few places to hide your money. and I suspect that it's going to get even more difficult to do so in the coming years.
I think so too. Mr. Sundaresh is asking you, with the domestic demand being hit, people are not going to spend so much. What will happen to our GDP growth?
There are varying estimates of GDP growth. The most optimistic that I've seen, and one which I personally consider to be extraordinarily optimistic, I was going to use the word ludicrous, but I won't do it, is the one presented by the IMF recently, where they're projecting that in 2020, India will have a positive growth of around 1.5, 1.6%.
Okay.
I am of the view that we are in negative territory this year, and flat to negative. I'm also of the view that next year we are going to find it very difficult to show a really healthy growth rate. So, and why do I say that? I say that because for the reasons everyone knows. I mean, we are facing a massive destruction of demand. We're facing a massive disruption of our supply chain. We're facing the issue of migrant labor that's not going to be able to perhaps, or that will not return to cities. We are facing sectors like the construction sector, the real estate sector, which are the major employers of urban labor, are in the doldrums. There is massive oversupply of residential buildings. Commercial real estate, I think, is going into a deep dive. Construction can only take place if the government of India pumps a lot more money into the economy. I am not seeing a pickup on private investment, and I don't see how household savings are going to also increase, given that millions have lost jobs and income levels have really got depressed. So a combined impact of slowdown in demand, destruction of demand, dislocation of supplies, the social implications of COVID, the consequences of the consequences of COVID on the informal sector, and also, of course, on the wage laborers. I'm seeing that for the next 18 months or so, we should expect flat to no growth. Let's say flat to very marginal growth in the Indian economy. Now, that said, let me just be clear. That said, individual companies are going to actually show very different results. There are some companies already that are going to ride the wave of a COVID and post-COVID crisis, such as the health sector, such as the online sector, the delivery companies, such as the technology sectors, IT outsourcing companies, such as maybe the entertainment sector. Today, Netflix, Apple are trading at Walmart are trading at all-time highs, as against the collapse in the share price of, let's say, the energy companies. ExxonMobil, which was the largest energy company, oil company in the world, energy company in the world, has lost almost 60% of its market capitalization over the last 6 weeks. So there is going to be a bifurcation in the performance of different companies. So at the macro level, I see a slowdown. No, I don't see a slowdown. I see a stagnation of growth. At the micro level, it's going to see some companies that are going to outperform and other companies that are going to struggle.
Somebody is asking, Mr. Prasad, will India become agri-production giant in the situation, that given situation?
Did you say agri production?
Yes, that's his question.
Let me answer that question indirectly. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to be able to give you an expert answer on that specific question, but I do believe that the preconditions for India to be an agri anything need to be addressed. And one is that we need to remove some of the distortions that currently impact trading of agricultural products. Number two is that we need to remove the distortions that prevent farmers and agricultural agro-processors, that is, agriculturalists who are processing farm products, from maximizing margins. We need to remove the intermediaries that today take away a large part of the margins that should be actually in the hands of the producer. We need to make sure that the farm sector is able to leverage better access to inputs like seeds, water, electricity. Today, that is a completely distorted market as such. Farmers receive electricity at times that they don't need it. They receive water at times that they don't need it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the agricultural sector is is distorted by government policies and government regulations. It's of course a sector that is in the hands of the state governments. So it's very difficult for the central government alone to address this. And but if we were able to perhaps create a more seamless relationship between the farmer and the end consumer, a farm to fork sort of argument, I do think that Indian agriculture can double, if not treble, its productivity and also really make an impact on the Indian economy. Today, it contributes barely 16-17% of our GDP, whereas 40 to 45%, no more, 60% of our people work in agriculture. We need to come to the point where agriculture is contributing double that to our GDP.
As think tank, you can actually, since you're saying it's a state subject as such, would you consider giving advice to these states as to how to develop that production and the entire supply chain, what you just talked about just now?
No, I mean, I as I say, I'm no expert. I mean, as I said earlier, the agricultural price and marketing regulations, they need to be removed. The pricing system needs to be rationalized, and the distribution of electricity needs to be streamlined. Distribution of seeds, distribution of water. All of these are subjects that, of course, are in the hands of the state, largely in the hands of the state, or shared with the center. So every state handles this very differently. So there's no one answer. I mean, I couldn't give an answer that would be applicable to 28 states of India.
One person, Abhinav Sharma, asked you to elaborate a little bit on FTA.
I don't have enough information on that, Abhinav, I'm afraid. I mean, again, as an economist, there are many arguments for and many arguments against. I personally believe that an FTA should be signed, that an open economy is something that benefits India. But as you know, probably, the FTA arguments have got so bogged down because of the impact that it has on domestic producers, domestic entrepreneurs, that we are not able to, in my view, establish a very clear line of thinking on this. So we walked out of RCEP. We haven't signed the FTA. with the EU. We haven't signed. I think we have FTA with some countries, and many economists will argue that those FTAs have actually worked to our disadvantage. So I'm not going to give you an answer on that, other than to say that a freer trade regime is one that will work to the advantage of the Indian economy. It will also work to the advantage of Indian industry. It will force Indian industry to be more competitive. It will also compel Indian government to remove some of the distortions that make us a high-cost economy. And I do think that is where we have to now move if we want to leverage the opportunities that a post-COVID world will offer us. We have to be more competitive. Otherwise, we're going to lose to Vietnam. We're going to lose out to Cambodia. We're going to lose out to Thailand. We simply cannot expect investors to come in if we can't replicate the kind of example that Deepak Bagla was suggesting regarding the wind farm company that I heard, where it took them only 14 months to start their project in India. Now, if that indeed can be our, if you can scale that model up, if we can achieve that across the country, then we would be a very successful industrial economy. I believe that FTAs are one way of introducing competitive spirits in our economy.
Someone, before I can thank you, Prasad had thanked you and said salutes to Mehta ji for such fantastic answer to agri question. What deep knowledge he has in spite of being a proactive in oil sector. Thanks. He just thanked you. Just looked at it and I thought I should pass it on to you. Because I was also wondering in agri sector, why would I ask you? But then I did ask that question and he's very happy. And
can I come?
Yeah, somebody else is coming in. I'm not seeing any question here. Who is this?
MK Chauhan, Mahendra here.
Mahendra, you can ask. He can hear you.
Hi, Vikram. Congratulations. You covered very wide range of issues. You also covered briefly about the geopolitical issue. Do you think the power equation shifting to east now, and where is India in that?
That's a very deep question in one sense. There was you all probably know of a man called Kishore Mehbubani. He used to be he is a Singapore academic, formerly a diplomat. 2 weeks ago, he wrote an article in The Economist in which he argued that that many countries in Asia, I think he said Asia, not many countries, Asia has handled the pandemic much better than the West. And he implied that the handling of the pandemic actually reflected the efficiency of, now he didn't use those words, he was more sophisticated, but let me put it in my words, the efficiency of autocratic or semi-autocratic governments. And the basic point that I guess he was trying to make there is that people will be responsive now to the realities of the global environment. They will look at systems and economics that best delivered their expectations and their needs. And they're going to ask the question, is the Singapore model, for example, is a variant of the China model, for example, a better model than the American model, which made a complete disaster of the response to COVID, excuse me. This question itself, in fact, reflects, I think, the possibility of a realignment in the entire geopolitical, alignments. I do believe that there is, and I said it very clearly, that there is a wide gulf, a deepening gulf between US and China. And I believe that this gulf is going to lead to two centers of power. Initially, it will be a US-centric technology center and a China-centric technology center of power. But it will also then convert to geopolitical centers of power. And a country like India may well have to decide whether it wishes to align itself with any of those centers. It certainly won't align itself with China, but it will have to decide whether it wishes to align itself with the US or whether it wishes to remain outside these two centers of power. We're going to find, I think, a variant of the non-aligned kind of system that Jawaharlal Nehru, promulgated in the 1950s. Americans are going to put pressure on us, I suspect, to anchor a coalition that could start with where the memberships could cover countries like Saudi Arabia and go all the way through to Australia as a counter to China's coalition, which would be underpinned by its efforts to create allies through the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. India will have to decide whether it wishes to anchor such a coalition. I don't think India will move into that sphere. I think India will remain outside it. I think India would be better off remaining outside any particular sphere. It needs to actually address each issue on a case-by-case basis. But India has a real opportunity, and that's probably my last word, of leading a world that's going to be polarized, because it has economic strength. I should start again. It has the fundamentals for economic strength. It has the human resources to lead a technology and digital transformation, or to be part of a digital transformation. But it must, in order to actually realize these opportunities, it must make sure that it does not, drift back into a permit Raj kind of control and command and control economic system, and it must really undertake some of the reforms that have been so overdue, whether it's land-related reforms, capital markets, financial market reforms, or labor market reforms. If it does that, I think India could be a real player in the coming years.
Thank you, Amin. Thank you, Vikram.
Vikram, I think I should now close it, but one question was there for you, which I didn't. Girish Bhagat, given the manufacturing capacities of China and their capability to supply at much lower costs, what is the time frame you think before these dynamics can be replaced in the US or EU?
So a very good question, because I think we underestimate the complexity of the supply chain issue. The manufacturing capacity in China is huge, and the investments made by companies in China are huge and very complex. It's going to be very difficult for companies to disassociate themselves from China and relocate elsewhere in the short term. All those who talk about the supply chain disruption and about a shift in the supply chain must take must look at this very fundamental fact. What I think is going to happen is that companies are not going to reinforce their investments, or they're not going to double down in China. They're going to diversify away from China and, as best as possible, continue their operations in China. So it's going to be multi-localization production centers. So China will remain a production center for many companies, but in addition to that, there's going to be a production center, let's say in Vietnam, Cambodia, hopefully India, and also maybe back in their own parent country. Okay, so China's manufacturing capability is not going anywhere. It's going to be there, it's going to remain, it's going to be very strong. And companies that have invested in China cannot just pick up and pull out overnight. Okay, let's be clear about that.
Okay, great. Lot of congratulations to you, and thanking you and saluting you and Deepak from many people. Now I cannot name so many, but on behalf of the participants, myself, and our members of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and others who have also participated, having seen these wonderful names, yours and Mr. Bagla's. I'm extremely thankful to all the participants who have come in and asked these questions. And I did thank Mr. Bagla earlier, but he did say he'll handhold everybody through Invest India and his team. And all the members are very excited about that. Some roadmap he showed. And Vikram, your knowledge is another level. What an intellectual, what do you say, capacity that you can talk about any subject. Your knowledge is awesome. No wonder you're the chairman of the biggest think tank, and very rightly so. And any difficult question for you, it was just another, direction. That's all. I've always known that you are so, but now seeing the way you moved in from different subjects, completely different to what you're working on. As somebody said, oil prices and few things that you're a specialist about. Every sector you could think, with a deeper knowledge, and your knowledge is international. So that makes a lot of difference, and thank you so much for having accepted our request, and I'm truly grateful to you.
Thank you, Rajyalakshmi. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm delighted that I was able to attend this session. Thank you.
Take care. All of you be safe. Thank you very much. I'll just call this. I think. Just call him. Close it. Last person, 50 people.